Good morning, Andre.
Hello, Dr. Todd. You sound great. We're going to be starting in just a minute. We've already got a bunch of people on the webinar, so hang tight. And for those of you that are joining us from around the state of Florida, we're excited to have you on our new webinar about expanding advocacy and treatment options in Florida, and new data to share with you, and excited about hearing more from Dr. Todd and others about what we can do to solve this crisis.
From coast to coast in every corner of the U.S., deaths from fentanyl overdoses are soaring. More than 100,000 people died from drug overdoses in a 12-month period ending in October of 2021. Recent CDC data revealing 2/3 of those deaths are linked to fentanyl, and those deaths doubling over the past 2 years.
It's tough to hear those numbers. Again, my name is Andre Bailey. I am your host today. I'm also the CEO and founder of Project Opioid. Some of you know me from our work here in Central Florida. Also, we have work around the state of Florida. And so I'm excited to be here today to share with you some somber news. Again, our webinar agenda today, for those of you who are able to stay with us for 1 hour, we do not go over 1 hour. We will be very cautious with our time. We're going to do a welcome. We're going to talk about data, new community strategies, collaboration that can increase treatment options. We're going to share about that, and the coordination of new resources. We've got new funding, and we're excited to talk about funding that's coming down to cities, counties, state and national, at a state and national level as well, what you can do with that funding and how you can get your hands on it. Strategies for integration, launch of a new Florida naloxone program. We're putting together a Florida naloxone network, and we'll be closing out with more information on that. Next slide, please. I want to also say that, as always, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll try to answer them. If we can't answer them, we'll answer them offline. A couple special guests today. Next slide, please. Again, we will be hearing in just a little bit from Robert Stewart Jr. Dr. Kendall Cortelyou is going to be interviewing him, talking a little bit about what happened in Tallahassee this year in regards to the opioid crisis. We had a session that just ended, important updates from him. Next slide, please. We're also going to be, in addition to that, talking to the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Todd Husty. He is one of my favorite docs out there who is passionate about MAT, medication-assisted treatment, and why that is so important. So we'll be getting to him in just a minute. I'll have him co-pilot the conversation about the new data that came out just a couple weeks ago on the numbers of fatalities in Florida. Go to the next slide, please. For those of you that don't know, well, Amber Adario, she'll be talking with us in a minute about the Florida Naloxone Network as well. So for those of you that don't know, what is Project Opioid? Project Opioid is an advocacy nonprofit. It focuses not just on what needs to be done, it focuses on who needs to work together to address this insane death crisis that we're seeing, driven by fentanyl. And so Project Opioid seeks to bring leaders together, courageous leaders, and empower them to change this crisis in their community. Next slide, please. Leadership absolutely matters. And we are so privileged to have great leaders around the state of Florida. As always in Florida, I got to give a shout out to my friends at Florida Blue and the Florida Blue Foundation. Pat Garrity and Susan and the whole team there are amazing. And as I like to say, in Florida, there would be no Project Opioid without Florida Blue and the Florida Blue Foundation. So big thank you to them. And thank you really to all of our leaders. We have close to 1,000 active leaders from the business community, the faith community, courageous elected officials who want to move past just talking points and move to action all over this state, as well as many of you who work with us on the ground, Florida Impact Lives. Project Opioid is, again, about three things: building a coalition in your community of the right leaders, advocacy, and community engagement that can change this crisis. Next slide, please. we always like to just put an emphasis on this point. You need to bring your community together. We want to help you do that. Don't leave the business, faith, and philanthropic community on the sidelines. When you pull them in with government, with criminal justice, with your nonprofits, and with healthcare, you create a wonderful tension that can make big change happen. Next slide, please. So again, today, talking about expanding treatment, but let me just start by telling you the end of the story at the beginning. We're going to get into the data in just a minute. Dr. Todd and I are going to talk about the newest data, but here's what you're going to hear. Next slide, please. Here's what you're going to hear. 4 things you need to know right now about the overdose crisis. I'm going to tell you the end of the story at the beginning, and then we're going to come back. Here's what the data that we just got 2 weeks ago. Some of you have seen this data already. Many of you have not. Here's what you need to know, and here's what the data is going to tell us. Number 1, next slide, please. Fentanyl still driving this crisis. I am begging and imploring some of you who have been working from a policy standpoint, from a treatment standpoint for a long time, to remember that this is no longer a prescription pill crisis. The overdose crisis was driven by prescription opioids for years. We in Florida know better than anyone that prescription pills and the overprescribing of drugs was absolutely driving this crisis really up until 2014, 2015. But around that time, this crisis changed and turned on a dime, and it is now a fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid created from chemicals in a laboratory, chemical precursors that come from China, are then sent to the Mexican cartels. 98% of all the fentanyl is created in Mexico and then sent over into the United States. And it's the deadliest drug we've ever seen. It is so potent, and it continues to be weaponized every single day. So again, this is no longer a prescription pill crisis. This is now a fentanyl crisis. Your leadership, your policy needs to reflect that. Next slide, please. In case you've never seen how fentanyl is made, we like to show this clip. If you know, this is fentanyl being made by the Mexican cartels in the woods in Mexico. So if you wonder, how does someone overdose on fentanyl? Because this is how it's made. These workers die every single day making it, but you see that fentanyl is being put, next slide, please, into everything, anything and everything drug related, dangerous and deadly. It is, and so fentanyl is driving this crisis. That's what the data is going to show us in just a minute. Again, number 2, though, this crisis is killing young people at the most extraordinary rate we've ever seen in American history, in Florida history. But here's why, guys. This is now fake synthetic opioids, fentanyl, synthetic opioid, fentanyl, now being put into what looks like prescription pills or traditional drugs, but actually these drugs are fakes and are filled with fentanyl. We show this slide a lot, but we feel like you need to see it over and over again. If you are someone who, or know someone who's seeking drugs on the street, this is the Russian roulette that someone is playing right now. An authentic prescription oxycodone on the left, on the right, a fake oxycodone that could probably kill you because it's based and laced in fentanyl. Next slide, please. What the DEA is telling all of us, I know a lot of you guys know this, 2 out of every 5 fentanyl-laced or fentanyl-based fake pills contain a lethal dose. We were told recently that by the DEA that there are already 1.5 billion fake pills in the United States that are lethal, with another billion on the way. These drugs are coming in from everywhere and anywhere. It's going to be hard to stop them. We've got to increase treatment. Next slide, please. Another thing we're going to hear, and this is on the positive side, new strategies to save lives. Again, talking to Dr. Todd Husty in just a minute, we're going to be talking about new medications, new strategies for treatment that offer a lot of hope, especially to those that are vulnerable, those that struggle and don't have access to treatment. Guys, let's keep it real a second. when you are seeking treatment in any community in Florida, or really any community around the United States, treatment is hard to find. And if you do not have insurance, you often have virtually no options to get help when you're struggling with opioids. But there's some new strategies and new funding that we're excited about that we're going to talk about in a minute that we think can get life-saving help to those in need and ultimately target the most vulnerable and at risk of overdose by aligning a community. For some of you who work at a community level, screenshot this, man. Send this to your mayor. Send this to the CEO of your hospital. Send it to your sheriff. This is what your community has got to look like, guys. We've got to be working together. These one-off treatment options that are uncoordinated at a community level, it is not working. And you're going to see the numbers in just a minute. Historic highs of overdose deaths continue in Florida. Coordinating ourselves with new options can make a big difference. And lastly, I just want to share what we're going to hear today is more about working together. Project Opioid, we cannot stress this enough. If you care to solve this crisis, you cannot do it alone. We need the mayors working with the counties, working with the sheriffs, working with the treatment providers, working with everyone in the hospital system, working with EMS, working with insurance, working with corporations and their HR departments. Together, we can impact this crisis in a way that can save lives. Dr. Todd, are you there? Let's see if we can.
I am.
Wonderful. Dr. Todd, I'm going to go through this data. Dr. Kendall Cortelyou, who supplied this data, is having a little technical difficulties. You know, it's 2023. Everything's on Zoom now, man. So, you know, we can be anywhere in the world and connect with us, but she's got a little bit of technical difficulties. She's going to be coming in a minute to talk to Robert Stewart Jr. about the policy side. But Dr. Todd, I think you saw this last week, the data for 2022. It always lags. It came out on May 18th. Drug overdose deaths again reach a record high in America. Next slide, please. And in Florida, those deaths basically plateaued. This is the death rate. Dr. Todd, when how long have you been doing medication-assisted treatment and helping folks with opioid use disorder?
Just a couple of years now, Andre. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with the sheriff's office, and that's where we started, was in the jail, Seminole County Jail. Just been a couple of years though, so back to a little bit less than 2 years. So there are not enough of us around there. We're having a hard time finding people to prescribe medication-assisted therapy, although hopefully we're hopeful that that'll get better.
Got it. And if you look at these numbers, again, this is across the United States, but we're going to see Florida in just a second. You know, when you were sounding the alarm, many were sounding the alarm in 2018, 2019 about the just insane overdose rates in Florida, across America. Look at where they've went in the past 3 years. We're now seeing a very, very historic increase in deaths. Fatal drug overdoses have increased 45% in the state of Florida since 2019. Almost all of these deaths, next slide, attributed to fentanyl now. Dr. Todd, when you see these numbers in Florida, 22 overdoses a day that kill people, you know, what's your first impression?
I'm an ER doc. I mean, I was an ER doc, have been for 40 years. And we don't have anything like this. This is like it. I mean, we have heart, we have stroke, we have congestive heart failure, we have diabetes, but we don't have anything that kills like this. I mean, young people, not just old people, but young people too. By the way, I'm an old person, so I'm allowed to talk about us.
You still look great, my friend.
Thanks. But yeah, this is sort of unprecedented. And, you know, I wanted to say something. I've been trying to be involved in this, Andre, for 5 years. It really took a while to figure out how my team could weave ourselves into it. It was harder than I thought. I think it's getting easier. So I have some hope, but we're a long ways from being there.
Yep. Next slide. I want to show you, Dr. Todd, the numbers again. These just came out a couple of weeks ago. Look at this. This reads like an eye chart, I know, but look at the fentanyl deaths in the US. The deaths in Florida mirror this. Basically, folks, you can screenshot this. We'll send it to you later in the follow-up. But here's what you need to know, that fentanyl is absolutely now really not the only killer, but the major killer of someone who will die of overdose. And Doc, you've seen folks come in overdosing on fentanyl. Why is fentanyl different than prescription oxy?
It's just so much more potent. I mean, and it's also, prescription oxy, real prescription oxy, at least you have some concept of how much is in there. I mean, you really kind of know how much oxycodone is in there. Fentanyl, because most fentanyl, we actually use fentanyl medicinally, but that's not what's on the streets. What's on the streets is made, just like in the video, is made somewhere in Mexico, most of it. And what concentration is it? We have no idea. So one day somebody might get a batch that is this strong, and tomorrow it might be 10 times stronger. And it's all 100 times stronger than good old heroin.
Yep. So fentanyl, the major driver of deaths in this country. And Dr. Todd, we're going to talk about naloxone, which people know as Narcan or Kloxxado. There, other versions of it. But how high would this death rate be without Narcan, without naloxone, Kloxxado?
So I'm the EMS medical director in Seminole County. We don't see overdoses anymore that have not already been given Narcan naloxone. I mean, that almost all of them, 95% of them, have already been treated. So we don't see the ones that have died there and they have not called EMS. But naloxone is saving a lot of lives and helping us save lives. It'd be at least twice as bad.
Got it. Go to the next slide. Now, Dr. Todd, here's something fascinating in the data. I hate this slide, by the way, but stay on it a second, Amber. I hate it because the different colors give a false impression. So basically, though, this is what's important, Dr. Todd. In the next 90 to 100 days, we're going to see the county data start coming out for states around America and in Florida. That lags even further. State data is out. County data will follow in 3 to 4 months. What we're going to see, and this is fascinating, is that some states, some counties are seeing exponential increases, while some are seeing exponential decreases. The overall death rate is up, but we're seeing some states have precipitous drops in deaths. Dr. Todd, we're working on, Project Opioid is working on a new data study on this. But in my opinion, what we're going to learn in the next few months is that states that are prioritizing medication-assisted treatment, the expansion of naloxone, and getting people on FDA-approved medications if they're struggling, those states are the states that are seeing decreases. The counties that are doing that are seeing decreases, while others are seeing increases. I think it's going to be fascinating, next slide, please, to see how new treatment options, again, you said you've just been doing medication-assisted treatment a few years, how that actually translates per county. This is an all-drug annual AADR slide. Again, we're seeing certain counties fare better, other counties struggling at higher numbers. Not to be surprised that in Florida, some of our communities struggle more than others. But you're going to see, Dr. Todd, and again, next slide, please. I don't want to spoil this for some of those out there who want to wait to see our data report 100 days from now. But Dr. Todd, what we have seen is that communities and states that were hit hardest by the prescription pill crisis and got the work going 7-8 years ago are actually the communities that were the early adopters of medication-assisted treatment and are seeing exponential results. So that's gonna be fascinating to look at. But here's something that's, again, insane. If you look at adolescent deaths, those who are 24 and younger, in 1999, we were barely even counting these deaths. They were just so rare. Now we're seeing one of the largest rising categories of drug deaths are those who are in their teens and in their young 20s. Dr. Todd, I'm going to ask you to give, your philosophy on something that is a big question, but why are young people still risking their life, many times not knowing that fentanyl is in the drugs they're taking, but many times knowing it? Why are we seeing this incredible increase in deaths among our teenagers and 20-somethings?
So I don't think teenagers themselves have changed that much, even as old as I am. We were a little more experimental than we should have been. And we took some risks and had some risky behavior. In modern times, that a little bit of risky behavior is extremely risky. I mean, that's how you have to look at it is, there's other things that adolescents do, like huffing and, just all kinds of weird huffing things and different drugs. And they experiment more with other drugs. And it's like they don't look at them as dangerous. They're just, they don't trust that there's this addiction problem that is going to nab you. They don't understand. I think a lot of the ones that are trying and experimenting are experimenting with things that can just take them away and make it so that they become addicts. I don't think that the education about that, the clear education of how addictive these substances are, has been out there. It's a huge.
Dr. Todd.
Yeah.
Check this next slide out. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but check this next slide out. This goes to your point that basically young people are taking the same amount of drugs they've always taken. Drug usage among young people is not up. It's actually the impact that's up. So, to your point, young people are being young people, but drugs are more dangerous than they've ever been. It is a dubious proposition to experiment with drugs in 2023. Next slide, please.
I didn't know that was the next slide, Andre.
Listen, you're a Swami, my friend. And Dr. Todd and I will close this part of the presentation with, next slide, please. Just, the new threats continue to emerge. We've got new drugs, xylazine. What are these new drugs that are, we're barely figuring out, Dr. Todd, what fentanyl is. What are these new drugs we're seeing, and why are they maybe even scarier than fentanyl?
Well, interestingly, a couple of the new drugs out there are not even related to fentanyl, but they have severe, very strong effects. Narcan doesn't work on them. Other ones are yet another synthetic opioid that is even more potent. And we heard of carfentanil a long time ago, the elephant opioid. I mean, it still exists. We're not seeing a lot of that because that stuff is like 1,000 times more deadly. It just, not a lot of people take it and live. So, but there's some sort of in between now, still more potent than fentanyl. Oh my gosh. I think we just treated one the other day, by the way, because the medications we used worked for a minute or two and then stopped working. What's up with that?
Well, it's definitely a frightening time. And kind of recapping, and by the way, if your organization, your community wants these numbers, we're going to email them to all of you. It's bad news. Looking at the new data, it's bad news. Deaths are still incredibly high, and what can we do about it? Dr. Todd, stay tuned there. We're going to come back to you in a minute. Next slide, please. We definitely want to hear for a minute about options that might be coming down from Tallahassee. We've got Dr. Kendall Cortelyou, Robert Stewart Jr., our friend in action in Tallahassee. They're going to be talking to us about what's going on regarding that crisis. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We'd love to answer your questions and get to all of them if we can, for sure. But again, we need a legislative update. Policy matters, funding matters, and we're going to hear from them in just a minute.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Andre. And I'm really happy to have with us here a great friend of Project Opioid, Robert Stewart Jr. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Kendall, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join this amazing group. What y'all do on a regular basis, gathering this many leaders from throughout our state is unmatched. And so thrilled to be a part of it today and more broadly to be a part of the Project Opioid family.
Yeah, you are definitely a part of the Project Opioid family. You've been around for a long time, almost as long as I have, I think. And, we've been through a lot. A lot of changes have occurred in the last 3 or 4 years. So first, why don't we start, Robert, and just introduce us and tell a little bit about yourself and what you do with Gray Robinson.
Sure. Well, and thank you for that. I'm, again, Robert Stewart with the Gray Robinson Law Firm. I've had the privilege of being a part of the government relations practice for almost 17 years at the firm, and represent clients across state, local, and federal levels of government. The bulk of my practice is at the state level in Tallahassee. And while I have a lot of favorite clients, my absolute favorite client is Project Opioid, getting to work alongside you and Andre and your leadership team and your amazing board of directors and pursuing both policy and appropriations issues at the statewide level in Tallahassee.
And we really appreciate it. I'll tell you, again, we've been doing this for a couple of years, and I've learned so much about the legislative process from you and from Andre and working with the Project Opioid team. So first, next slide, please. Can you just give us an update on the budget? How did everything end up this year? It seems like every year it's kind of a wild roller coaster.
Yeah, and that's a great place to start, Kendall, because the legislature, while they are up there for 60 days, for the regular session, and they're working on any number of issues, the only thing that they're constitutionally required to do is pass a balanced budget. And so this year they did that. They actually finished a little bit early this year, which has been a rarity in recent years. A total budget of $117 billion, which is $10 billion larger than the current year that we're in right now, and more than $3 billion above what the governor had asked for in his proposed budget back in February. That is partly due to the governor underspending a little bit in his proposal, and also due to continued increased revenues in Florida. I don't have to tell anybody on this webinar that Florida is continuing to boom. We continue to grow by over 1,000 people per week in Florida that are permanently moving to our state. In fact, that number may even be more than that now in terms of our weekly growth. And as a result, we are collecting sales tax revenues in particular at a rate that far exceeds even the most aggressive of estimates by our bean counters. And so $117 billion total. The best piece of that $117 billion is the $475,000 that is earmarked for Florida Project Opioid's pilot expansion project, taking what y'all did with the state's money in 2021, 2022, and for the Central Florida region, and taking that statewide. We expect the governor to receive the budget any day now. In fact, if you were asking me to wager amount of money I cared about, I would have told you it was going to be done last week. I'm glad that I didn't wager, because I would have been wrong. I do expect it any day now, and particularly now that the governor's national announcement is behind him, I think you'll see the budget come his way here shortly, and that will be executed and signed into law. But also the line item veto power that the governor has will also be put into place, and we'll just be waiting to see what comes of that veto list. We have done on your behalf and in partnership with Project Opioid, we've done everything you can possibly do to hopefully avoid that veto. And so I'm continuing to stay in daily communication with the governor's office about this important priority, and really taking Project Opioid back to its highest and best use and its roots of advocacy and education, and launching that statewide. So we're fingers crossed and hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can avoid the veto, that would be amazing. There's so much good work to be done. And next slide, please. And that kind of leads us into the opioid settlement money. So we have really, it seems like you and I have been having this conversation for years, right? Like, when's the opioid settlement going to hit? How's it going to get to communities? How's it going to be used? But it looks like we finally got some traction in that area. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Opioid Trust Fund.
Great question. And they did finally establish, they almost did it last legislative session, but they waited for some of these cases to reach a point of settlement. And so what we have now is it was Senate Bill 7030. It establishes the State Opioid Settlement Trust Fund within the Department of Children and Families, and that money will be there for the purposes of abating the epidemic in accordance with the settlement agreements that are reached in the various litigation or bankruptcy proceedings that are going on around the country, and Florida's share of that. And so this year alone in the budget, that $117 billion, there is tens of millions of dollars in spending through DCF as part of that trust fund as that settlement money flows, and there's tens of millions of more dollars in spending authority for the department if more money becomes available and flows into that trust fund. So the legislature needed to create sort of the statutory mechanism to collect it, and that's what Senate Bill 7030 did.
That's great. When do you think we'll see that kind of trickle down into the communities?
That's really one of the unknowns. Another bill that we're going to talk about is House Bill 783. And within House Bill 783, there was the creation of the statewide council on the opioid abatement within DCF. And that's going to help guide some of those decisions. The makeup of that council will include a representative appointed by the governor, one appointed by the Florida House, one appointed by the Florida Senate, two by the Florida League of Cities, including one that has to be from a city of 50,000 or less, two by the Florida Association of Counties, of which one has to be from a county of 200,000 or less. So you're making sure that small cities and small counties are represented. And then the Attorney General also has an appointee. And in fact, the Attorney General could serve on that board if she wanted to on that council. It's his or her designee. It's his or her or their designee, I should say. And so that council will play a role in some of that. I think the short answer to your very short question, and I went on for a little bit there, is we hope very soon. And the legislature certainly hopes very soon that money will really begin to flow, get into the hands of groups like those represented on this call to really do the work that's been a long time coming in our state.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of leaders on this call that are, anxiously awaiting those settlement monies, but also at the same time, it's kind of daunting to figure out how to spend that money as well. And
my guess is, Kendall, that there are people on this call that will know more about that timing than I ever could.
Right.
And so if you're listening to this and you have thoughts or ways that we can maybe be helpful to you through Project Opioid and getting your hands on some of that or finding the ways to apply, please reach out. These folks know how to reach me, and we're happy to help wherever we can.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we put your email address in the chat, because I'm sure we have some amazing leaders on this call, and I think there's a lot of people that do have a good understanding of what's going on. So, there's a lot of budget money that's rolling out, but I know that there are some other legislative actions that are going on. So both in the House and the Senate. So what are some of those?
Yeah, so 783, which I just talked about, which creates that council. There's a second part of that bill that requires the Florida college system to have Narcan effectively in every dormitory or residence hall that they own. Last year, they did that for the state university system. This year, they added the Florida college system. The hope is that is a program that can expand into every school, every public place, that we can have that available, because we all know that it works and it saves lives. And it is, in the grand scheme of things, completely inexpensive when compared to the treatment costs on the back end. And so the hope is that can grow, and there seems to be real commitment from the legislature to help it grow. Another bill that passed, which was a bit controversial, and you'll quickly understand why, was House Bill 365, which revises the criminal penalties related to distribution and selling of heroin, fentanyl, and related substances. It allows for criminal penalties of up to first-degree murder, depending on amounts and knowledge of who was getting it and those types of things. It defines terms such as distribute and overdose or serious bodily injury and other related terms, so that law enforcement has the tools they need to determine what charges ought to be made. For obvious reasons, there's some controversy around whether or not this can stand up to a court test, and we expect that it will be tested at some point. But in the meantime, the governor has received that bill. He's actually also received 783, which I mentioned. He got both of those bills last week. He has until June 7th to act on those. And so we're waiting to see what his action is around that. But those three bills, the 7030, which created the trust fund, and the two House bills that I talked about, have all passed and are awaiting action by the governor in various respective situations. And we have anticipation that he's going to sign all of those eventually.
Sounds like some really positive bills. I mean, as you know, I work at UCF, and I've seen, just how vital it can be to get some of these harm reduction strategies into colleges and universities. So it sounds like a lot of really great and amazing changes that are coming up soon. So what do things look like next year, Robert? What can we expect?
So looking ahead, obviously the governor, the first and foremost thing in my world and in the world of many on this webinar is that the governor needs to receive and act upon the budget and all the other outstanding bills that are still waiting his action. So all of that should be done in the next few weeks. You've all seen the announcement. The governor is going to be spending a little bit of time away from Florida over the next several months in places like Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and other states. And so as a result, we do expect that there will be some fairly rapid action. He signed a couple of bills just today. There'll be a couple more tomorrow that we're expecting. And so once he receives the budget, once he acts upon that, that really triggers what the next fiscal year looks like, which will obviously begin on July 1st. And then for better or for worse, for those of us that follow the legislative process, they're going to be back at this before you know it, with even numbered years being January and February sessions. So 2024 will start January 9th. That means everything before that, all the committee weeks have to back up in advance of it. So the House will convene for a committee week in September, just the House. The Senate will have one by themselves in October. And then there'll be one other joint in October, two each in December or in November and December. And then before you know it, we're back in the legislature dealing with the regular session in January of next year. So the other thing that also gets expedited is things like the governor's proposed budget will be due in December next year and not in early December and not in February like it was this year. Agency budget requests are going to be due probably early August for the next year. So all this stuff just sort of is accelerated. All the timelines are sped up. And for us, on your behalf, we won't slow down. Whatever happens with the budget this year, we won't be slowing down. We'll be full speed ahead towards next session.
Wow, that's a really fast timeline. It's really like next year is just being rolled into this year. Wow, that's great. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all really valuable information. I know the leaders on this call appreciate your time, and I do too. So thank you so much for joining us. And back to you, Andre.
Happy to do it.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, Dr. Kendall. Again, policy matters. For some of you who keep up with what happens in Tallahassee, policy matters. And we are so thankful to our friends at Gray Robinson and others who advocate for this opioid crisis with our statewide elected leaders. We've got about 23 minutes left. We will never go beyond 1 hour on these webinars. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what the data tells us we need to focus on in Florida, where our funding might need to be focused. And I want to take a minute to also talk with Amber from our team, Amber Adario, about a new network of folks who are going to be working to expand naloxone. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Amber. As always, put your questions in the chat. Let's see for a second, though, again, why this expansion is important.
Please come now. My daughter's unconscious.
It's the sound of sheer panic.
How old is she?
16. Sophia! Sophia! She's on her back. Please hurry.
Got them on the way.
It was a quiet afternoon near Boulder, Colorado, when Ryan Christoph finds his then 16-year-old daughter, Sophia, barely breathing.
I'm pushing on her chest, and it's making some noise, but she's unconscious.
Okay, is she laying flat on her back?
Blue. She's on her back on her bed.
Listen carefully, and I'm going to tell you how to do chest compressions.
Within minutes, Sergeant David Cohen with the Lafayette, Colorado Police Department pulls up.
I'm going to count with you, okay? So try and go with the pace I'm counting, okay? Keep up with that pace if you can, okay?
I'm responding with an AED.
Hold on, I think it might be, hold on. Up here, up here!
Upstairs?
Cohen sprinting up the stairs and into Sophia's bedroom.
What is her name?
Sophia.
Let me take over CPR. Sir, does she use narcotics?
Sophia's father telling him he doesn't think so. He only knows of her smoking a little weed. But Officer Cohen's experience told him otherwise.
Lincoln 21, slight pulse, and Narcan administered.
As the approaching ambulance gets closer, the Narcan kicks in.
She breathing? She's breathing, yes, sir.
Sophia had taken a Percocet that came from a drug dealer, not knowing it was laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid used to treat severe pain that is 50 times more powerful than heroin.
Crazy stuff. Amber, are you there? Go to the next slide. Dr. Todd, You still there? We want to get your feedback at the same time. I'm going to come to Amber in just a second. Next slide, please. Dr. Todd, we know Sophia and her family through some of our partners. Dr. Todd, did you know that it took law enforcement 3 Narcans to bring her back? 3 Narcans to bring her back. What are your thoughts on the increasing power of fentanyl that we're seeing right now? Next slide, please.
So what should we do? I answered a chat question about the same, and we still should be giving naloxone, no matter how powerful it is, or whether it's actually ISO, which is even more powerful. We should still be giving naloxone. And how many of them should we give? I don't know, 2, 3 of them, whoever, how many there are people there that have them. Well, maybe up to 4. You don't want to drown the person with the liquid up their nose. It takes a while for it to work. So what I train law enforcement is naloxone is what you give up their nose just before you start CPR. It was really, really impressive that they're having the dad do CPR, that the law enforcement officer does CPR as soon as he gets there. But once you give the naloxone, you should still be doing CPR, not because it's a heart issue. CPR moves air. And that's the important part, is it moves air. And you want to be moving air, because that's what's going to kill her, is the lack of air. And EMS is on the way, and they have other ways to move air that you don't. So it's hands-only CPR moves air.
Got it. Dr. Todd, stay right there. I'm going to bring Amber Adario in. We're going to talk for a second about our new program that we are launching to coordinate partners around the state of Florida who want to distribute naloxone. Amber, go to the next slide, please. Show yourself on the slide, then you can talk in real life. Amber, are you there? I know you're there,
I'm
actually.
Here.
How's it going? First of all, Amber, let me just say thank you to you for all the work you're doing. I don't know that there's anyone in the state of Florida that has distributed as much naloxone as you. I know there are others actually doing a great job as well, but you have done wonderful work with Project Opioid and some of our partners. But now we're going to take that work of naloxone distribution to the next level. If you're an organization out there that wants to distribute naloxone, this is the announcement for you. We are launching the Florida Naloxone Network, where we are going to be organizing, training, and helping organizations distribute naloxone in their community. I want to take a second and thank some new partners of ours from Aetna and CVS, who are the sponsors of this Florida Naloxone Network. Big thank you to Nick and Megan and all the people at Aetna and CVS. We're going to be talking to them in our next webinar down the road. But Amber, let's dive in. Next slide. A little bit. I know we're short on time, but let's talk a little bit about this Florida Naloxone Network. We've got a problem. And Amber, from your perspective, what is the problem with distributing naloxone?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of great organizations around the state that are distributing naloxone. I think the number I last heard in conversations with DCF was around 400 organizations around the state are distributing naloxone. And in record high numbers, we are just really making the folks at DCF work with the SOAR grant and getting that naloxone to us. And so it's really amazing to see the increase in numbers, both on the SOAR grant side with public organization and the HERO side with law enforcement and first responders. But really the problem is that while there are so many different resources available to people, there are even more places for people to search for them and find them. And when someone's in a state of crisis, they're isolated, they're overwhelmed, and endless searching equals paralysis. They really just can't really have the ability to problem solve for themselves because they're in a state of crisis. And so that's where it's really important for people like us who are in a position to provide assistance in some way. We need to pull them into the fold. And too often the solution has been throwing the resources out there into this big giant ocean and then telling people, hey, the resources are there, go get them. But we're really not giving them a key path to follow along in order to get that help. So the goal with the network is to help facilitate creating that path. And by connecting leaders and organizations that are doing tremendous work on this crisis, both in advocacy and treatment, I think we can create that path together.
Got it. Amber, go to the next slide. We have 2 slides about the solution. And by the way, what Amber is saying right now is if you are an organization around Florida, we want to train you to distribute naloxone, or if you're already getting naloxone, Narcan, Cloxato, it's known by different names, but if you're already getting it, we want to train you on some of our newer distribution methodologies, like our downtown drip campaign, and some of like Robert Stewart Jr. had talked about getting more naloxone into schools and universities. But Amber, when it comes to the solution, phase 1 is really about us finding all the nonprofits and community organizations and activating them, correct?
Correct. It really is. It's about creating a network, a place for us to all collaborate and work together. We really must truly come together on this crisis, collaboration at all levels, to create an equity for all paths to recovery, right? We know that there is those who find recovery with abstinence. We know that there are those who find recovery with medication with assisted treatment. And so we know that there are many different paths to recovery and that those are unique to the individual, but we all need to work together to solve this crisis. And we need to create a little bit of accountability to the people over the policies, because so often we get lost in the bureaucracy, in the monitoring, in all of the dots and crossing of the T's that we have to do in order to maintain funding and things like that, that we lose sight of the point, which is helping people. And so we really need to, become accountability partners for one another. And I think that this network will help us to provide that, as well as facilitate the ability to share ideas and resources, ways that distributing is more successful than other ways, be able to partner to do community events. And like I said, really create true community on this effort, because we're not competition against one another. We may be in a competitive marketplace, but we really can't function under that premise. We have to work together. And so, it's critical to solving this crisis.
Got it. So in phase 1, we're going to be bringing people together in this network. Phase 2 is going to be about meeting people where they're at, helping with the distribution. So many times, Amber, there's a challenge for organizations to get naloxone, but then when they have it, we're going to be coaching them on the best ways to get it into the hands of those that might need it. What does phase 2 look like in your opinion?
Well, phase 2 is about meeting people where they are, creating that niche community and removing distractions, creating one bridge to all paths to recovery. And it's really just about meeting people where they are. I mean, I can't say it enough that some of the organizations that we have distributed to that have gotten the most of our naloxone, I've heard back countless times about people who have been revived from the naloxone that we've distributed to them. And that's a humbling story to hear, because it's terrifying to know that if we weren't able to provide that naloxone, it might not have been there otherwise, and that person might not be here today. And it's incredibly distressing to know that such a simple act on our part made such a fundamental difference in this total stranger's life. And so we have to just remember that these people are in a state of crisis. They are struggling, and we need to meet them. We can't expect them to come find us, because it is just not going to be successful that way. They are in a state of crisis, and they have a diminished ability to problem solve for themselves. And so it really is just about creating a community separate from our social medias, separate from our event sharing platforms, and creating a singular space where we can all share that information, share those resources to individuals in need, so that they aren't getting distracted by all the other things that come with going on TikTok or going on Facebook or Instagram and looking for trying to find events, or going on Google and trying to find your treatment facilities, right? We want to try to create a niched place for people to find all of this information, so that they don't have to go to the ocean to find the fish, right? We want to give them the fish.
Got it, Amber. Well, let's with the last two slides, let's show people. No, that's perfect. Faith, listen, we're going to be working to educate, recruit, and distribute naloxone through you. This is not about Project Opioid doing this. This is going to be you, your organization. Go to the next slide, Amber, for the sake of time. We have a QR code that you can use. Scan this QR code. We're fancy people who use QR codes because we're cool like everyone else in the world who uses QR codes. But we want you to be a part, your organization to be a part of the Florida Naloxone Network. We're going to be doing our first coordinated distribution on National Opioid Awareness Day, which I think is August 31st. So we want to sign up right now. We want to help you. If you're not getting naloxone from various sources, we can help you get that at no cost through the state resources that are available. If you're law enforcement, we can help you connect through HEROES. If you are a nonprofit, the SOAR grant is available to you through an application process. But in addition to that, we want to work with you to do coordinated distributions at the community level. We know that that is ultimately where it's at. Amber, again, thank you for all the work. What's your final word to organizations that reach out to you about this network?
Well, I really think it's important that you guys consider joining this network so that we can work together. All of the work that you do is not unheard. It's not unseen. It is amazing and people are grateful for it. We really just want to help make you as successful as possible. And really at the end of the day, help save lives.
Wonderful. Amber Addario, she is the head of Project Opioid's Florida Naloxone Network and a wonderful advocate here in the state of Florida. Amber, stay put. Next slide, please. We've got about 9 minutes left. Dr. Todd, are you still there? Did you bail out on us? Or are you
still here.
Look at that. The faithful. I like it. Again, we've had some questions in the chat. Dr. Joel Hunter, who I love, by the way, a Central Floridian, was asking who is, quote, the statewide leader on the opioid crisis when it comes to the faith community. Dr. Hunter, I'm not sure. I don't believe there is a statewide leader, if you will, but I think there's a huge gaping hole when it comes to the faith community in regards to this in Florida and in all the communities in Florida. Not that there's not faith groups working on this, Dr. Hunter, but there's not a coordinating agency. So talk to us. We would love to partner with you to work on that. So thank you for that question. Dr. Todd, we also had a question, next slide, please, as we wrap up in the next 8 minutes. We had a question about medication-assisted treatment. Go to the next slide, Amber. As we look towards, where do we go from here? 5 things people need to know based on the data we just heard in Florida. Next slide, please. Dr. Todd, we're hearing the deaths keep rising. We need naloxone anywhere and everywhere. Dr. Todd, there's really no controversy around naloxone, right? I mean, we're way past that. I hardly hear anyone fighting back on naloxone.
There is no controversy about naloxone. It does put people into acute withdrawals, which, sometimes they get combative. They go into acute withdrawals. They feel sick, but that's a lot better than dead. So there really is no controversy about using naloxone. We just need to get it out there. And we're being successful in some areas of Florida, very successful. We need to keep it up. So thank you, Amber, by the way.
Got it. Next slide, please. Again, 7 minutes left. We're going to get you off this webinar. We never go late. As you have heard, Narcan, there's next slide, please. There's another form of naloxone that we're big on. We love Kloxxado. The SOAR grant just approved Kloxxado a few weeks ago, basically double strength Narcan. We encourage every organization, have Narcan, have Kloxxado, have both. Next slide, please, because these are tools that are saving lives. You got to have these in your medicine cabinet. Restaurants, bars, hospitals, schools, all need these accessible at any given moment. Next slide, please. What else do we need to go ahead?
I need to point out one more time. It's very important, just like in the video we saw. It's what you give right before you start. Well, you start CPR if you don't have naloxone, and then you give naloxone and you continue CPR until they start breathing. It's extremely important.
Call 911, start CPR, give naloxone. Got it. Number 2, as we're wrapping up, 6 minutes left. Dr. Todd, more controversy, next slide please, around medication-assisted treatment, FDA-approved drugs like buprenorphine, Suboxone. For those of you that have not heard, the overdose initiative, we are pushing really hard for communities to build a coalition and use data and strategy for big next steps. Ultimately, though, the most important, in my opinion, big jump up that we need to do in Florida is make medication-assisted treatment available to those who are struggling. We can offer Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, for very, very cheap. There's also new FDA-approved, long-lasting injectable forms of buprenorphine that really are showing tremendous progress. Dr. Todd, how do we break the stigma around medication-assisted treatment? By the way, before you even answer that, I would say this: for those that have seen people on methadone before, I get it. I get why people are skeptical of methadone. I'm not telling you not to prescribe methadone or not have someone use methadone, but methadone is very, very, very different than some of the newer drugs. Go back one slide, Amber. But let me just say, Dr. Todd, I want to hear your opinion. We need
the big controversy is replacing a drug with a drug. And, so we're just replacing one drug with another drug. Well, that may be true to an extent, but it's that drug you're replacing it with does not get you high, does not
Correct.
Decrease respirations. It has basically no side effects. Do you need to do that? Yes, you have to remember how addictive these substances are. They're so addictive that you have to coat those receptors for a period of time, maybe a year, maybe more. You have to keep them coated till the person gets their life back. So yeah, it is kind of replacing a drug with a drug, but it doesn't get them high. That gets them their life back. And who cares if it's replacing a drug with a drug? I mean, if it works, and it does work.
Yeah, and again, so
Andre, I'm sorry, I just want to interject here to reinforce what Dr. Hussey just said. When I do my trainings around the community, I often refer to the graph that you showed us about how buprenorphine does not take you over that line into highness, that like the way opioids and methadone do. And I think that is so critical to mention, because people who are coming out of addiction and into recovery often still have chronic pain that they have to deal with. So we don't want to tell these people that the only solution to recovery is chronic pain and torture forever. So for many people, buprenorphine is the solution to their addiction. It offers them treatment for their pain as well as treatment for their recovery. Correct?
Thank you for that, Amber. Totally agree. We got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to rush through these final slides. Amber, keep going forward. Dr. Todd, thanks for staying on, and thank you all for staying on. We've got 2 minutes left. Next slide, please. Let's see, Amber, go forward. Number 3, as this data has told us, we got to educate our young people. Many of them don't know the dangers of drugs. You're going to see Project Opioid launch a new campaign in just a few weeks called What's the Fix? Looking to educate young people, let Gen Z and millennials talk to each other about this crisis. Next slide, please. We've got to educate people more and more. And ultimately, what are the solutions? Collaborate. You're going to hear this from us over and over again. Don't work in a silo anymore. You need your mayor. You need your county leaders. You need your hospital CEOs and leaders. You need your treatment providers. You need your sheriff. You need your faith leaders. You need your business leaders. Get them together. Next slide, please. If you get them together, anything is possible. With the last 60 seconds, keep going, Amber. We're going to have to hop off. Get your leaders together. Next slide, and anything is possible. Work together. This slide is so important. Send it to your community leaders. Join the Florida Naloxone Network. We scan the QR code in right here. We want your organization to be distributing naloxone with us. Next slide, please. And as always, again, we are thankful for you and that you are leading with compassion. Let's leave stigma behind. Next slide. As we go, 60 seconds left in this webinar. Thank you for staying with us. This is one of the 110,000 people that died last year. This was sent to us by one of our partners in California, who's tied to us here in Florida. Justin was struggling. He was doing better. He was in recovery. Then Dr. Todd, he had one bad day and he died because of one bad day. We can't let this happen anymore. Next slide, please. We just want to thank all of our Project Opioid partners. In conclusion, screenshot this, get a hold of us today. Stop being on the sidelines with this crisis. This phone number is my phone. That's Amber's phone. Connect with us. We want to get you involved around the state of Florida on this opioid crisis. Big thank you to Dr. Kendall for her data. Thank you to Robert Stewart Jr. for his policy update. Thank you to Amber Adario for her work with naloxone. Dr. Todd Hussey, thank you for all you're doing. And all of you out there, let's see you step up your work. You're doing a lot, but let's see you step up. Together, we can save lives in 2023. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to all of our partners. God bless you, and we will talk to you in 4 weeks on our next webinar. Thank you so much.